What's up, everybody? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Today we got it's going to be a really interesting show. We're going to hit on a topic that I think we all love to talk about, and that's the JFK assassination. Even 50 years later, it's still such an important part of history and American history. And we got Roger Stone, who is a political consultant. He has over 40 years in politics. He's worked with numerous ex-presidents, and he has a really interesting book called The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. And it's kind of a theory that I think a lot of people haven't heard as much. I think a lot of people hear about CIA and the mob, but I don't think a lot of people have tied in LBJ's motive, and really he would have the best motive to do it, or the biggest motive, because he became president without ever being nominated as it. So just want to thank Roger for being with us today.
Ricky, great to be with you.
Thanks for taking time to be with us. And so let's get right into what do you think is the strongest evidence of basically linking LBJ to assassination and possibly knowing of it or actually being a part of it?
Well, I have tried to base my investigation on the classic criminal requirements of motive, means, and opportunity. I don't think that the idea that Lyndon Baines Johnson was complicit, in fact, was the linchpin of a plot to kill Kennedy, is inconsistent at all with those who believe that the CIA was involved in Kennedy's murder, that the mob was involved in Kennedy's murder, or that Big Texas Oil was involved in Kennedy's murder. Indeed, they all were. And the one thing they all have in common is very close, intimate relations with Lyndon Baines Johnson. But it was Johnson who, on November 22nd, 1963, was in the most immediate trouble. Johnson had blackmailed his way onto the 1960 ticket at the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles. President Kennedy, then Senator Kennedy, had decided on Senator Stuart Symington of Missouri as his running mate. He had offered the position to Symington. Symington had accepted. He was drafting his acceptance speech when LBJ and House Speaker Sam Rayburn showed up at Kennedy's hotel room late at night, and they had with them a dossier on Kennedy's sex life. The dossier had been supplied by J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover was a very close political ally of Johnson's. He was his next-door neighbor in Northwest Washington. And it's notable that between 1951 and 1961, during the time Lyndon Johnson was the Senate Majority Leader and controlled the appropriations process, J. Edgar Hoover's budget actually tripled. The FBI budget tripled. Hoover's motive is clear. He was moving up on mandatory retirement age in 1964. He knew that the Kennedys intended to remove him. So he worked hand in glove with Lyndon Johnson. Johnson confronted Kennedy with all the problems he could make him with the leaking of these documents regarding the sexcapades of JFK, and Kennedy folded. He reluctantly put Johnson on the ticket. Politically, that turned out to be the right thing to do, because Johnson spent the campaign really in the South, reassuring segregationists not to worry that when Kennedy talked about equal rights for blacks, he was only kidding, that JFK was not really in favor of equal rights for African Americans. And because of that, Kennedy was able to hold on to the states in the Deep South, the last time, by the way, that the Democrats were able to do so. And Kennedy was very narrowly not elected. Fast forward to 1963, Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States, who hates Lyndon Johnson because of the way Johnson bludgeoned his way on the ticket, and because of the campaign that Johnson had run against Kennedy for president in 1960, in which LBJ made it very public that Kennedy had Addison's disease, something Kennedy denied at the time. By the way, he was lying. We now know, did have Addison's disease. Kennedy's health was very bad. Robert Kennedy was leading an effort to dump Johnson from the 64 ticket. But more importantly, there were open investigations at the Justice Department and in the U.S. Senate into corruption by Lyndon Johnson. Indeed, Johnson knew that on December 1st, Life magazine planned to publish a page-one expose on Johnson's finances. That would have immediately led to Johnson's indictment, his prosecution, and prison. He also knew that Robert Kennedy was feeding the Senate Rules Committee, and they were investigating Johnson's involvement with a man named Bobby Baker, Secretary of the Senate. Baker had collected millions of dollars in bribes for Lyndon Johnson. So on November 22nd, Johnson wasn't just looking at political ruin, wasn't just looking at being dumped from the 64 ticket. He was looking at public humiliation and jail. And that was his greatest single motive in killing John Kennedy.
Yeah, and he had also links to big oil too, right? Wasn't he a big stockholder of Halliburton before it was Halliburton? It was something else at that time, right?
Well, Johnson had unique ties to everybody else involved in the plot. Johnson was the appropriator for the Central Intelligence Agency. Johnson, as a member of the Senate, even when he was majority leader, appointed himself to the Appropriations Subcommittee on aerospace and defense contracting, in which the CIA's secret black box budgets were tucked. So Johnson had delivered billions of money to the CIA, was very close to the military-industrial complex. He was also very close to organized crime. Lyndon Johnson was taking a $50,000 a month bribe from Carlos Marcello in order to protect the illegal gambling operations of the mafia in San Antonio and Houston and Texas and Dallas from the U.S. attorneys in Texas, who were, of course, appointed by Lyndon Johnson, or I should say, selected by Lyndon Johnson. And then lastly, Johnson was very tight with Big Texas Oil, and they were furious at Kennedy because he was seeking to repeal their sweetheart tax breaks, the oil depletion allowance. So all three of them, the CIA, the mob, and Big Texas Oil, had a motive for replacing JFK. The CIA was upset about the failure of John Kennedy to order air support for Cuban rebels in the Bay of Pigs invasion, which had been a disaster. They were even more upset because we now know, 40 years after the fact, that in the Cuban Missile Crisis, even though, Ricky, you've been told brave LBJ faced the Russians down and they removed their missiles, that's bunk. Robert and John Kennedy made a secret deal to remove U.S. missiles from Italy and Turkey. The Russian missiles were never removed from Cuba. And the CIA knew that. That was classified for 40 years, but the military knew it at the time. The CIA knew it at the time. Both the CIA and the military were well aware of the fact that John Kennedy was a methamphetamine addict, that he was sometimes out of his mind, that he was treated by Dr. Max Jacobson, who was injecting him with methamphetamine before his summit meeting with Khrushchev, before the 1960 debates. He was many times out of his mind. I think that's how they rationalized the effort to remove him. So I think all the pieces fit together.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think that going to the things about Kennedy, I think that's kind of a issue we have with history is that you look at Reagan, you look at Kennedy, you look at a lot of ex-presidents, and we look at them like you get the Republicans and Democrats, and they look at them as those were the great days, they were the great presidents, but they all had skeletons in their closets, and they all were. They all had corruption. They all dealt with corporations and making money and foreign and had bad foreign policy. And so, what do you think it is that we look back at? Because even JFK, and I'll admit I'm a fan of JFK, and I think that he did do a lot of great things, and I think Robert Kennedy would have been probably a good president. But I also don't like to put JFK on a up on this plateau where he just was mistake free and he was perfect and whatnot. It seems like it's same thing with Clinton. Clinton's another thing where like everybody looks back and talks about how great the or basically America was at the time when Clinton was president, but he did a lot of bad things too. He had the OTW or whatever it was to include China. It's in the whatever it was, the World Trading Organization, to include China in that, and now we get all our imports from China. You look at obviously the Whitewater scandal and all these other things. And it's just like, what do you think causes us to look? I mean, is it like almost like a relationship when you're dating a girl? Things seem awful. Then when you break up, you look back and you only remember the good things. It's like we only remember the good things about these presidents, and we don't realize, they weren't perfect either.
I must just the opposite. See, I see only the good things when I'm with the girl, and after I break up with her, I realize all the terrible things.
Well, that's
no, I think you got to take this in parts. First of all, the role of the media in 1961 through 3 was very different than it is today. Because of the circumstances of Kennedy's violent death, we have a mythology built around him. The truth is, he didn't get anything done on civil rights. He barely even tried. He was too concerned with trying to keep the Southern racists in the Senate, who were Democrats, copacetic with his program. He promised African Americans a Voting Rights Act bill. He promised an open housing bill. He promised them an equal accommodations bill. He did none of those. In fact, in 1957, he voted for Lyndon Johnson's amendment to the 57 Civil Rights Bill that required that those who violated that law would be tried before state juries. And of course, in the South, no all-white state jury would ever convict a white man for a crime against a black man. So, ironically, Nixon had a perfect record on civil rights. It was Kennedy who had been a trimmer. But because of the mythology, we only remember the stylistic things. Kennedy was inspiring. Cuban Missile Crisis, he got taken to the cleaners by Khrushchev. Bay of Pigs, a failure. The Vietnam War, I know liberals like to say that he was withdrawing us. Look at the Robert Kennedy oral history in 1963. He says, no way. JFK was going all the way in Vietnam. He believed in the domino theory. So there's a lot of revisionist history. Well, he was inspiring. Was he a great president? No, he really didn't do much as president. He was largely a failure, but he had a very favorable media. They knew he was a womanizer. They didn't report it. They knew that it was not widely known that he was a drug addict. There's a superb book, which I urge your listeners to get, called Dr. Feelgood, which talks about Dr. Mac Jacobson and his treatment of Kennedy with methamphetamine on a regular basis. He was also treating Frank Sinatra, Marilyn Monroe, Truman Capote, a number of other superstars of the day. It was very in to be treated by Dr. Jacobson, who was really just getting his clients, his patients, I should say, high. At least in Clinton's case, there is somewhat more balance. A number of his criminal activities and failures were reported at the time. It's certainly fair to say over time, voters tend to remember the good things and forget the bad things. I think that'll change. Let me be blunt. If Hillary Clinton runs, bills passed as a rapist, as someone who assaults and attacks women, bites them, rips their clothes, attacks them, threatens them, and then covers it up, pressures them to be silent, that will all be out there. Names: Juanita Broderick, Kathy Willey, Miss Arkansas. Bill Clinton is a rapist, a man who abuses women. Let me go a step further. Hillary knows about it. Hillary ran the cover-up. I have witnesses. She demanded a list of women to silence them. The Clintons are evil. They will be exposed. The good news is that 40% of the American people don't remember much about the Clintons. You have to remember the change in the voters. So to most Americans, particularly very young Americans, Bill Clinton seems like that really nice guy with white hair that everybody said did a good job. That all gets re-examined if she runs for president. And I wouldn't bet on her having, an easy coronation. So it is with Kennedy, but the greatest single beneficiary of this is Lyndon Johnson. Let's be very clear. Lyndon Johnson and his wife owned massive defense stocks. He made between $300 and $400 million personally on the war in Vietnam. He owned Bell Helicopter stock. He owned Brown and Root stock. He owned what would later be Halliburton stock. He delivered a contract for $325 million to dredge Cameron Bay to Brown and Root. Lyndon Johnson made millions off the blood of American soldiers. That's a fact. If Linda Bird or Lucy Bird is listening, please sue me. I'd love to go to court and prove it. Lyndon Johnson was an amoral psychopath. He was a serial murderer. John Kennedy's not his first murder, Ricky. In my book, I tie him to 8 murders. Murders to cover up corruption, murders to cover up vote buying, murders to cover up electoral fraud. Lyndon Johnson could order a murder the way you and I would order a ham sandwich. He had an epic appetite for alcohol and cigarettes and women. He fathered 3 illegitimate children while he was president or vice president. Their names are in my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. You can go on Amazon right now or Barnes & Noble and buy it. It was a New York Times bestseller. I named names. Notice none of those 3, actually only 2 of them living, they haven't sued me. Why? Because the minute they stepped into court, their physical resemblance to Lyndon Johnson would sink their case. So he was a cruel, sadistic lunatic. This is a man who enjoyed torturing animals. As a boy, Lyndon Johnson tied a stick of dynamite to a stray dog and blew him up in the town square. He beat up a mule with an axe handle, beat him to death in front of witnesses. He regularly tortured his dogs by pulling them by the ears when he was president. This is a sick, psychotic bastard, an unbalanced psychopath. That was Lyndon Johnson. His own aides, Bill Moyers, George Reedy, they knew he was a lunatic. They knew he was mentally ill. They knew what he was capable of.
Yeah, and the Warren Commission. Well, actually, before we continue on JFK, I wanted to bring up the Clinton thing because you're absolutely right. I'm not just to make it clear. My viewers know, but or my listeners, I should say. But you probably don't know my political stance. But I'm independent. I don't believe in either political parties. I know that you recently became a libertarian, and honestly, if I had to pick one, that's probably the party I agree with the most. I mean, I'm a huge Ron Paul fan. I don't believe in picking teams because then I feel like it stops the debate, and then you always have to agree with your team. So I'm definitely not bashing Clinton because I'm pro, Republican or Democrat or whatnot. But you're absolutely right about Clinton. There is huge connections with him in Meta, Arkansas, and Barry Seal, and the links to the Iran Contras and the cocaine that was coming into Meta, Arkansas, and obviously Clinton was governor at the time, and he has. I mean, there's 2 great documentaries I can reference people to: the Clinton Chronicles and the Meta Connection, and they're 2 great documentaries that actually some of the people you reference are also in there, I believe. And yeah, so he's definitely, and I wonder if that's probably going to be a big deciding factor on why Hillary might not run. One, she's getting a little up there with age, and I hear that her health isn't that great. But 2, there's a lot of skeletons in her closet that are going to come out, and I think it's going to affect Clinton's legacy a lot because
I think that Bill Clinton was drawing blood from prisoners in the Arkansas prison system and selling it abroad for millions of dollars. The blood was never screened for HIV or other diseases. Yes, he was involved in the drug trade. I hope she runs. The American people need to know all this. We need a candidate who will take it to her in the debates. Someone needs to stick their finger in her face and say, Hillary, you and her husband were in on drug dealing. You know it. I have the proof. What do you have to say? If we get another Mitt Romney, and I'm not a Republican or a Democrat like you, I've become a libertarian. I was a lifelong Republican. I worked for President Nixon. I worked for President Reagan. I worked reluctantly for President George H.W. Bush. I was not particularly a fan of George W. Bush. But over time, I've come to learn that both parties are in it together. When I see the Bushes and the Clintons at the library openings kissing each other's behinds, they're all corrupt. They're all in on it. They all need to be exposed. I'm hopeful. I want her to run. I want her disgraced. I want the American people to know that she actively covered up her husband's sexual escapades, not consensual escapades, rape, sexual assault. That's Bill Clinton's specialty. He has bitten at least 5 women that we know of. I will put those women on TV in 2016 in 30 and 60-second spots so the American people can see what the Clintons are.
Well, and the recent the Jeffrey Epstein thing where he's a friend of Bill Clinton, who is this multimillionaire, I guess, and has an island, and he's getting in trouble. I guess he has a history of lawsuits for hooking up with underage women, and now there's a link between Clinton and going to this island with underage women. So and that's public. I mean, that's gotten some news recently. So it's not, I definitely think that probably one of the reasons why they might not run is the fact that at the moment people do have this I guess when they look at his legacy, they really don't remember much besides people saying that times were great, and that might mold his legacy. And I'm not sure they're going to want to affect that, because really once Hillary runs and all this other stuff comes out, it really is going to make people reconsider their image of Clinton. So I wonder if that's a deciding factor. But to be, like you said, and I'm glad you said that both political parties aren't that different. I mean, everybody talked about, but what happens? Because you look at like Obama, when he first ran, he was talking about getting out of Afghanistan. He was talking about, closing Gitmo. And then all these news stories came up where high generals and military people and CIA people were saying, oh, I don't think Obama can handle the foreign policy. I'm not sure. So it's like, I wonder if they're trying to shut him up, and like maybe like from you being in the inside, and now, like, looking back at it, do you feel like some politicians do have, and there are some politicians out there like Ron Paul who truly have good intentions, but do you think that the reason why there's so many corrupt politicians are because of the fact that the money is unavoidable, and then it's temptation that people just can't restrain from taking advantage of, or is there something else, like, or is it that they go in because of the power and money and they never really had good intentions in the first place? Why do you think we see so many corrupt politicians?
Well, first of all, I think that a lot of good people get co-opted. I think that's a substantial issue. Isn't it interesting that Obama took a poll, and the poll showed to get elected he needed to say that he was going to end the war in Afghanistan and he was going to close down Guantanamo Bay. He was never going to do either one. So let's look at Romney, Obama, because they went out of their way to try to sound different, okay? Neither one for a balanced budget. Both for the Patriot Act. Both for NSA spying on Americans. Both for the Afghanistan incursion. Both for the Iran war. Both for more spending and more debt. They were identical. They sure sounded different, but when you got right down to it, we have a political establishment, and they were beholden to it. The system is corrupted by money. Candidates like Ron Paul, who I also admire, and his son Rand Paul, they have to get their money in $25 increments from average people. There's no big corporate support. There's no big Wall Street support. There's no big financial support for somebody who doesn't want to toe the establishment line. So, in essence, Obama would say anything necessary to become elected.
So
another way, Nixon wiretapped one small building. They threw him out. Obama is wiretapping the entire country. Nothing happens. Right now, this podcast is being monitored. It's being listened to.
I'm sure it is.
Recorded. Ricky, they probably think you and I are enemies of the state. It's scary, but it's very sadly true. Yesterday, I read something where Jimmy Carter, not somebody I admire, not a great president.
No, he wasn't, but I know.
But even he's smart enough to say, if he wants to communicate with another world leader, he mails him a letter because he assumes all of his email is being recorded and monitored. He's absolutely right.
Yeah, and it's weird how we look at, like, if we told people that when Jimmy Carter sends his mail, that somebody from the government opens up his mail, reads it, makes copies of it, and then puts it back in the mail, it's, we'd be like, holy shit, that seems like they're completely, just, I have no privacy. They've removed privacy. But because it's via internet, it's almost like we've become okay with the fact that all our information is online. But I'm like, they're still taking all your personal information. I mean, they're using it for marketing. They're using it for, everything's a statistic. And then you have the NSA that has that giant, facility in Utah that they're building with just holding hard drives of all our information. And really, they don't even, because it's easier to just store it all than actually sort through it all until you actually need to. So that's what people don't realize either, is that the guarantee that they're actually storing it all is the fact that to go through everybody's stuff constantly all the time would be impossible. But it's way easier to store everything. And then when you have a Michael Hastings or some reporter that you can get some dirty information on because you don't like what he's reporting, then you can go look at his records and find some stuff to say that he's not a credible source or whatnot. So I think that it's funny how if you took what the NSA was doing, but if it was 100 years ago or whatever, 50 years ago, and they were doing it through the mail, then it'd be we'd be outraged. But because it's through the internet, it's almost like we don't realize that it's the exact same thing. And I mean, do you think that's what the disconnect is the fact that we've just, and maybe that's what the government wants. They want us to be okay. And it seems like it. It seems like they're slowly conditioning us to be okay with the fact that all our information and personal information is out there. And little by little, we'll get so used to all our personal information being out there that, we just don't think twice about it.
Well, either that or we don't believe that they're really collecting your information. In other words, they may be, say, monitoring phone conversations between somebody in the United States and a prominent businessman in China. But why would they listen to Ricky's email? Why would they listen to my email? I don't have anything interesting to say. The truth is, we are slowly giving up our civil liberties without even knowing it. It's happening behind our back. We're barely cognizant of it. I want to go back to your first question because I want to get back to LBJ, if I may.
Yeah, definitely.
You asked me what the greatest piece of evidence. To me, this is the greatest piece of evidence. First of all, it was Lyndon Johnson who insisted that Kennedy go to Dallas. It was Lyndon Johnson's right-hand man, John Connally, who insisted on the specific drive through Dealey Plaza. The investigation into the Kennedy murder was, of course, controlled by the Dallas police and the Dallas County prosecutor. In 1963, murder of the president was not a federal crime. Murder was not a federal crime. It was a state crime. That meant Lyndon Johnson controlled the investigation from day one. And we know, and it is inexorable, it's proved by photographs, that as Kennedy's motorcade slowed down and made the sharp 180-degree turn into Dealey Plaza, Lyndon Johnson's car was 3 car lengths behind. And as soon as Johnson made the corner, but before the first shot was fired, Johnson hits the deck in his car. How do we know this? Well, first of all, there are photographs, and we know the exact time they were taken that shows that Johnson was not visible. He's on the car floor. We also have the memoirs of Senator Ralph Yarborough, who was in the car with Johnson, who says that Johnson inexplicably jumps to the floor of the car. Johnson would then pressure a Secret Service agent to lie and claim, well, he pushed the vice president to the floor when he heard the first shot. After Johnson's death, that Secret Service agent, whose name was Youngblood, said, well, that was a lie. I said that because the president ordered me to. So what did Johnson know that we didn't know? Why did Johnson duck? Why does the Secret Service violate all their own rules? I worked for 3 American presidents. I can tell you that when the president drives through an area where there are buildings on either side of the road, by law, the Secret Service is required to seal those buildings, empty them and seal them. That wasn't done in Dallas. There's supposed to be 6 motorcycle officers, 3 on either side of the car. They were called off. There were only 2, and they were ordered to ride behind the limousine, violation of protocol. There's supposed to be 2 Secret Service agents in the rear bumper. They were ordered off.
Yeah, and there's a video of that.
When the car drops below 40 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour, there's supposed to be 2 walking on either side of the rear axle. They are ordered off. Secret Service Director John Rowley got his job from Lyndon Baines Johnson. Rowley got his first job in government in 1937 through Lyndon Johnson. Rowley is a former assistant and close associate of J. Edgar Hoover. Ladies and germs, the Secret Service laid down on John Kennedy. They allowed him to be killed. It was a turkey shoot. It happened in Dallas. And the most incredible thing is, he wasn't shot by Lee Harvey Oswald. He was shot, at least one of the shooters is a man named Malcolm Mac Wallace. Wallace is a hitman who works for Lyndon Johnson. In my book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ, I tie Wallace to at least 8 other murders. But what is the evidence in Dallas? Well, there's a 34-point fingerprint of Wallace that is left on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building on a cardboard box in the so-called sniper's nest. But better than that, as my book shows, there are 6 eyewitnesses who see a man in the 6th floor window just prior to the shooting who meets the description of Malcolm Wallace, right down to his glasses. One man, a fellow by the name of Carr, actually saw Wallace in the window and then saw Wallace fleeing the building after the shooting, jump into a car and drive away. Richard Carr would have 4 attempts on his life after he made the mistake of telling the FBI what he had seen. Men tried to shoot him in Dallas. Men tried to shoot him again in Montana. Men tried to shoot him in New Orleans. So everywhere this poor guy went, there were attempts on his life. Why? Because he could finger Lyndon Johnson's hitman, Mac Wallace. When Lee Harvey Oswald says, I'm a patsy, he's telling the truth. He's not the shooter. He is a fall guy set up by the CIA to take the fall. He wasn't even on the 6th floor when the shooting went down.
Yeah, and actually, there's a video of that the Secret Service, the incident you're talking about, the Secret Service being told to stand down. Right before that, they took that last turn. There's tons of videos online that end up popping up of the Secret Service the Secret Service agents that were on the back. It was very obvious that they were told to get off, and then they shrugged their shoulders.
Why this change? Why this change in protocol? I mean, I have the Secret Service manual. Interestingly, Lyndon Johnson acquired a copy of it and gave it to his law partner, Ed Clark, almost a year before the assassinations. On inaugural day, 1961, very cold day, John Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson are being sworn in as president and vice president. Lyndon Johnson's right-hand man, Bobby Baker, later to be Secretary of the U.S. Senate, tells another man, Don Reynolds, who testifies to this under oath in the U.S. Senate. He says, John Kennedy will not live out his term and he will die a violent death. Johnson planned the murder of Kennedy from the minute he became vice president. The morning after he took the vice presidential nomination, Claire Booth Luce, a former congresswoman from Connecticut, asked Johnson, why would you give up the power of being Senate Majority Leader to be vice president? And Johnson said, well, I've looked at it historically, and so many vice presidents have risen to be president upon the death of the president. I guess you could just say I'm a betting man. Lyndon Johnson killed John Kennedy. There is no doubt about it.
Yeah, and have you heard the theory? I know Jesse Ventura's book, and he talks about it, about E. Howard Hunt and his admission to doing it before on his deathbed.
Yes, E. Howard Hunt says on his deathbed that he was in Dallas that day, that he was part of the plot. The plot did involve the CIA, and he confirms that Lyndon Johnson was the linchpin of the plot. You see, Johnson is indispensable because he controls the Dallas police and the Dallas County Sheriff's Office and the Dallas County Prosecutor. The CIA doesn't control them. The FBI doesn't control them. The mob certainly doesn't control them, although they certainly have relationships with the Dallas police. And Big Texas Oil doesn't control them. Johnson controls the local cops. That's why Dallas is, as Bobby Kennedy tells the Russians after the assassination, was the perfect place for the murder.
Yeah. And it's crazy that things like E. Howard Hunt admitting that he was a part of the JFK murder or assassination, the fact that that's not headline news is crazy to me. I know Jesse Ventura's mentioned that quite a few times where he's like, obviously, and didn't you had issues with promoting your book, didn't you? You had some, I saw you on Buzzsaw, and I saw you on Breaking the Set with Abby Martins and some of the less, I guess, mainstream shows, but the mainstream shows, you had some interviews that last second they end up canceling on you. Does it seem like they're trying to prevent any real, because I mean, look at the stuff they are talking about. They're talking about Bill O'Reilly's book, which is just insane because it's not accurate at all, and they're obviously trying to sell you the idea that there's nobody conspired to do anything. It was just some lone gunman, Oswald. Even if you believed it was Oswald, he had links to he went to Russia and came back on the height of the Cold War. And
Oswald was a U.S. intelligence asset. He had been an informant for the FBI. We were paying him $2,500 a month, which is huge money in those days. He had also worked for the CIA and been trained by the CIA. We now know that. But don't be too mad at the Warren Commission. The men on the Warren Commission covered up the death of murder because Lyndon Johnson told them we had proof the Russians did it. So he went to Earl Warren, he went to Dulles, who knew better. He went to the commission members. He said, in essence, you've got to help me cover up the truth because the American people will demand revenge, and it will mean a nuclear holocaust. It'll mean World War. So their motive was this false belief that Kennedy was killed by the Russians. Robert Kennedy sent a message to the Russians immediately after the murder saying, my brother was killed on the basis of a domestic conspiracy. Unless Robert Kennedy was lying, and I have no reason to believe that he was. Look, the Kennedys took $1 million from organized crime. The mob stole votes for JFK in Illinois and Texas and West Virginia and probably made him president. He double-crossed them by trying to deport two of the major mob figures, Carlos Marcello and Santo Trafficante. And that was a declaration of war. So the mob's role and the mob's motive is very clear. But let's be very clear. John Kennedy, who we believe was a saint, he made an unholy deal with the mob to steal the 1960 election.
Yeah, well,
Richard Nixon won the 1960 election. He came from far behind. He closed in the final 2 weeks after a bad debate. He passed Kennedy. They burned 50,000 Republican ballots in Dallas County alone.
Well,
the Kennedy-Johnson ticket only carried Texas by a fraudulent 45,000 votes. So John Kennedy he had an unholy deal with the mob. It's very sad.
That debate is an interesting thing because it was I believe it was the first televised debate, and I guess everybody who listened to it believed that Nixon won, and everybody who watched it believed that, not everyone, but a majority of the percentage of people thought that Kennedy won, and they were saying that was really the eye opener to politicians understanding how public appearance and how people come off and the way they look will be a big part of winning elections. And then
you had a couple different factors. Right after Labor Day, Nixon bumped his knee on a car door while campaigning in North Carolina and became seriously infected. He was hospitalized and put on heavy antibiotics for 2 weeks. This was after Labor Day. During that time, Kennedy pulled ahead in the polls because he was actively campaigning and Nixon was sidelined. Nixon left the hospital 15 pounds underweight, still on antibiotics, still ill, but couldn't waste any more time. He visited 5 states on his way to Chicago for the debate. Kennedy got to Chicago earlier. He spent the day relaxing on the rooftop with 2 hookers, getting a suntan.
Can't blame the guy.
Kennedy understood that the debate was more about style than substance. He wore a dark blue suit. Nixon wore a light gray suit. Nixon looked pale. He'd just come out of the hospital. He looked ill. He was 15 pounds underweight. His shirt collar was too big on him. When they went to the lighting check, which is kind of like the weigh-in at a prize fight, the CBS producer went to Senator Kennedy and said, Senator Kennedy, will you be using makeup? Kennedy said, no makeup for me. Nixon overheard this. Then the producer said, Mr. Vice President, will you be using makeup? Nixon said, no makeup for me. Then Kennedy went to his private dressing room where his personal makeup man made him up. And of course, Nixon went to his dressing room and was not made up for the debate. So they psyched him out. Nixon made the mistake of believing that the debate would be decided on the basis of substance. That's why the majority of the people who heard it on the radio thought he won. Kennedy understood that it wasn't about substance at all. It was about appearance. But Ricky, here's the part most people don't know. There were 4 debates, not 1. It is true that the audience for the first debate was the largest. The debates 2, 3, and 4, virtually everybody said Nixon won all 3 of them. The television audience for the second and third debate was much smaller than the first, but the television debate for the 4th debate was only a fraction smaller than the first debate, and it was a foreign policy debate. Nixon wiped up the floor with Kennedy. That's why he closed fast. That's why the final polls showed him pulling ahead. This election was stolen from him in Texas and Illinois by the mob in Illinois, by Lyndon Johnson, a champion vote stealer. By the way, Lyndon Johnson stole his own election to the U.S. Senate with 200 fraudulent votes. So the great, honest, wonderful John F. Kennedy stole the American presidency. That's a sad fact. And he wasn't much of a president when he got there. As we now know, he was high on methamphetamine most of the time. pushed no civil rights measures, got taken to the cleaners by Khrushchev. He really was a failed presidency, but because the media puts greater stock into style over substance, and because Kennedy is all about promise and the what ifs. What if he had elected? Well, he would have ended the war in Vietnam. Bullshit. There was no evidence of that. He would have opened the door to Castro and Cuba, possibly. But I think you can project anything you want onto the Kennedy presidency. It's all unfulfilled promise, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge issue. But I know we've been doing a lot of a Democratic bashing. But personally, I believe if you look at history, they both have tainted pasts. I mean, you look at throughout history, they've all had issues with bombing of countries and.
The war, voting for George W. Bush is probably one of the greatest regrets I have. I wasn't voting for a war in Iraq. I don't see what was our immediate national interest there. We were either fighting about oil, or we were fighting about evening the score between the Bush family and Saddam Hussein. Don't tell me it was about democracy. They don't have any elections in Saudi Arabia. There are no elections in Saudi Arabia. But there are close allies and major benefactors to all the Bush presidential library. So it wasn't about, the Iraq War wasn't about democracy at all. Both parties have blood on their hands when it comes to foreign wars where we ought to be minding our own business.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the Iraq War I think it's the very obvious one. The country today is just as bad as it's ever been. Whoever comes to power now, I know Obama in his speech he had at the EU the other day, he was talking about, now Iraq the people get their country back. Well, who's going to go to power? They don't know who's going to go up the ranks, and they might get somebody who's even more.
Actually, we do know. The Clinton-Obama foreign policy has systematically removed our allies in country after country and replaced them with regimes that hate our guts.
Well, that's because they want.
You look at I have a book out on the Benghazi mission attack. 460 days afterwards, no one has been arrested. Nobody has been apprehended. 15 Libyans on the ground who were assisting our investigation have been murdered. We have photos of the people who killed our Americans. They will never be brought to justice. The Arab Spring has turned into the Islamic winter. We are putting people in power who hate our guts.
Yeah, but we've always done that. We've done that in Guatemala. We did that in Chile. We've done that, we've done that in plenty of, that's kind of our history. I know Dwight Eisenhower gets the credit for, publicly coming out the famous speech about the military-industrial complex, but he had a big hand in creating it. Defense spending went up dramatically when he was in office. And
but not as much as those who wanted. First of all, Eisenhower ran a balanced budget every year. He resisted enormous defense increases. This was one of Nixon's disadvantages in the 60 campaign. Kennedy was the Cold War. He was the guy pounding the table for more defense spending. He was the guy who said, we will pay any price, bear any burden, wanted to run off to Vietnam. Eisenhower had reservations about Vietnam. Eisenhower, a military man, would not allow the enormous military buildup the generals were demanding, ironically. I guess rather than try to pick through all of our presidents who, as you point out, have made mistakes of both parties, my greatest concern is with the people who are in there now, because there's nothing we can do to go back and correct what George W. Bush or what George H.W. Bush did wrong. On the other hand, we removed Gaddafi, who was sharing his intelligence with us, who had renounced his own nuclear ambitions, and we put in place a regime that hates us. We removed Mubarak, who at least was keeping control of Islamic maniacs, and put into power in Egypt a regime that hates us. Look, I'm not an isolationist. I'm a non-interventionist. There are some really bad people in the world, and they do mean us harm. And there are times when they need to be dealt with and dealt with harshly. But that doesn't mean that we go around looking for wars to jump in the middle of or inserting ourselves. Let's take Ukraine. I think this is very interesting. Yukanovich, you with me?
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, I'm listening.
I wonder if I lost you.
No, I'm still here.
Elected in an open election, a free election that we certified as democratic. He made a policy decision that the Ukrainian people didn't like. So an angry, violent mob runs him out of office. That's not democracy. If you don't like what the guy does, you vote him out in the next election. But don't tell me this is about democracy, because they had a democratic system. We certified that election. We sent observers for that election. So, and let's also be clear, Ukraine is on the Russian border. If we were talking about Canada, we might have a different view. So, I reject the idea that what we're arguing about in Ukraine has to do with democracy.
Yeah, no,
Do is their own business. Why don't we mind our own business?
Yeah, and Ron Paul said that. One of the things that I think people or the mainstream media and has sold people is that anything that's a drastic change from what we're used to is a bad change, and it's too drastic. And I remember when Ron Paul was running, and I was a big supporter of his, and I would, get in, debates, because I guess debates when you're talking about politics are unavoidable, which I think are okay. I'm a big believer that as long as people are willing to listen to all perspectives and aren't just debating for the sake of winning the argument, but actually because they want to bounce ideas off each other, then it can be a very good thing. And so I would get in debates about Ron Paul, and a lot of people are like, oh, his views are too extreme. And I'm like, what views are too extreme? I'm like, the fact that they're like his foreign policy. And I'm like, his foreign policy, I'm like, he believes in defensive wars, not offensive wars. He's one of the few politicians that actually come out and calls things out the way they are. He calls out the Fed. He calls out, he talks about the income tax. He talks about plenty of things, decriminalizing, drugs. And I know that seems extreme, but I was born in Portugal, and Portugal is a perfect example right now of what decriminalizing weed does. And that's less filled up prisons with nonviolent criminals. You have less addicts on the street. It seems like the drug rate has gone down. So it's just like all these things that people consider extreme. Are they really extreme, or are they just convinced us that it's so different that we can't have that drastic of a change? And I wonder if that's what it is. If it's like they've done such a good job of they sold us Obama, him being different, but really, like you said, he's really not. I mean, you put gray hair on him, and he's Mitt Romney, or a Republican, So it just like, it's one of those things where I wonder if they've done a great job of always, every election year, convincing us that we have a choice because we have two people to pick from, when really we don't have an option. I think that they've been suppressing libertarians from being in the debates and being a part of this whole process.
That's my greatest objection. Governor Gary Johnson got on the ballot in 48 states.
You worked with him, didn't you?
I helped do that. It was very, very, very difficult, expensive, and time-consuming. It's the first time in the history of the Libertarian Party. That's not fair. They have gotten on 49 ballots in the past, but it has been some time. Based on the fact that it was theoretically possible for him to win 270 electoral votes, he should have been allowed in the debates. And the Presidential Commission on Debates is not appointed by the president. It's not a commission, and it's certainly not about debate. What would have happened if there was a third guy on the stage who said, not me, I would withdraw our troops from Afghanistan tomorrow. Not me, I would legalize, regulate, and tax marijuana tomorrow. What would have happened if people knew that alternative existed? He would have gotten a lot of votes. The vast majority of people, almost 78%, didn't know there was a third choice because the mainstream media wouldn't cover them. You talked about the trouble I had with my book, and I have no complaints. My book was a New York Times bestseller. My book on Lyndon Johnson and the murder of John Kennedy. I got terrific coverage out of Fox, Larry King, Glenn Beck. Thank God for talk radio. Thank God for shows like this one, Ricky. But yes, I was booked on CN, and then under pressure from the taxpayer subsidized Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library, they pressured CNN and they canceled my appearances because some people, if I may quote Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men, can't handle the truth. The mainstream media, they vilify people like Ron Paul. They make them sound like kooks, like maniacs. They're going to try to do it to Rand Paul, although I think he's a little faster on his feet. It's going to be much harder. The American people need to be offered a real alternative. I believe in the intelligence of the American voters. I don't think we have a nation of sheep. But if they're not presented the alternatives, they can never choose the alternative. If people don't know that there's an alternative to the Republicans and the Democrats, that there's an alternative to Obama and Romney. They can't choose the alternative. And therefore, thanks to the internet more than anything else, those of us who don't buy the status quo have to just keep chipping away. And it's why shows like this very one that we're on are very important, because people can get a different view that they haven't heard before.
Yeah, and you make, well, for one, I appreciate that, and I think that that's kind of my whole point of doing this show. When I first came up with the idea was hoping to do my little part in spreading open-mindedness and some ideas that you wouldn't necessarily get on mainstream TV, and the nice thing about the internet that we have a platform to share that. And but you made a good point about democracy. Democracy only works when people are fed the right information. Now you can control the information they're fed. Now, yeah, people are going to make bad decisions. So I think the first part of fixing that is kind of getting people the right information and showing them all their options, and not just you look at mainstream media, and that's the thing. I think that people are migrating to watching TV on YouTube and on internet shows and podcasts and all this stuff, and that's great, because we don't, for at least the time being, we have very little restrictions on what we can and cannot do. So I think we're going in the right direction, and but that's a huge issue. But we also have to take money out of politics. I mean, back to just one real quick point about Ron Paul. Ron Paul's foreign policy, a lot of people who called him crazy didn't realize that he got more donations from veterans than any other politician. So, that's a perfect example of people who were there and in the line of fire and know exactly what war is. And I think that's one thing that we've kind of been detached from. Like, we hear the word war, oh, we're in a war in Afghanistan, but we don't see it. It doesn't affect us personally. We don't see the images. We don't see the lives that are lost and the people that are affected by it. So it's easy to just be like, yeah, okay, but we're going on with our everyday lives and we're in a war, but it doesn't really affect us much, And I think that people need to be reminded what war is and what's really happening. But yeah, so I mean, I think that we need to get the money out of politics. But how do you do that when we know that lobbyists sometimes write the language for a lot of these bills? The politicians spend more time, raising money than they do actually, reading bills and trying to figure out what to push for or what not to push for. I mean, how do you change that? Is there a way of changing that, or can you work with it? I mean, I just feel like money out of politics is a huge, that and the political parties. I mean, Jesse Ventura made a really good point.
First of all, television time is expensive, and therefore a candidate without money is a candidate that no one's ever heard of and never gets anywhere. This is a very complicated issue I've thought about a lot, because I do believe money is free speech. I do believe that you should have the right to support those that you agree with as broadly as you want to. If we did not have Citizens United, then in all honesty, the left would control all of the money and you'd have a one-sided system. So it's not an easy issue, but I'm a big First Amendment guy. I really believe that when you limit speech, then we can never have the kind of deep reform in the system we need.
Yeah, but we have limited speech. Like, you look at Obama has charged more people with the Espionage Act, and whistleblowers left and right are being basically considered traitors. And I mean, how do we? It seems like, and I think, I mean, I understand the concept of, okay, money is a way of I think in theory it makes sense. Like, you can support somebody that supports your views and your ideas. But I think when the system's so corrupt and are basically the people who have money are people who this system has benefited, really, like, the average person doesn't have, as in other words, wouldn't have as much free speech as a corporation or somebody who's benefited from the corrupt system. So, I mean, doesn't that make things a little unfair?
Well, I'm not sure how you fix it. If you restrict all contributions and you say award television time to each party nominee, then you're going to deliver an enormous benefit to incumbents. 99% of incumbents get reelected now because of the enormous advantages of visibility that incumbency connotes. So I put it this way: it's a complicated problem, certainly more than we can solve in the next 2 minutes we have. But it is certainly a concern.
Yeah, I definitely. Are you positive about the future? Do you think that with the power of the internet, we can push for a libertarian party or just just a third party to get some attention and maybe make a difference in upcoming elections. I feel like we are. I mean, maybe it's just me and being in the alternative media and podcasting world and surrounded by other open-minded people, but I feel like we're going in the right direction. Like at least with awareness, you look at a lot of things that information's being passed a lot quicker than it's ever have. People can get information that they're looking for a lot quicker than they ever have. So I feel like we're going in the right directions. Do you believe that is it just me being in the alternative world of media and radio and whatnot, or are you positive about the future?
Well, we have to guard against the excessive regulation of the internet. The internet, to me, is the great equalizer. It has leveled the playing field. In other words, it used to be that if something didn't appear on ABC, CBS, or NBC, it didn't happen. If they didn't report it, no one knew about it, and that was it. Today, if you don't like what you read in the New York Times, you can go to the Ripple Effect and hear an alternative point of view. So we have to guard against excess regulation of the internet because the government and the establishment will want to regulate the internet in order to close communications down. I'm sure you saw this recent proposal that the Obama administration would plant people in the various TV networks to review content. That's one of the scariest ideas I've ever heard. It's Soviet-style censorship is what they're talking about. So I think, yes, I'm fairly optimistic because the people have a hunger for knowledge. They have a hunger for more information, and the internet provides it.
You ever consider running? When I know you've been aides to a lot of politicians and helped out a lot of people. You ever think about running, like throughout your career, growing up and stuff? Was it something that you thought about, or were you wanted to be more in the outside of politics?
I would be a terrible candidate. I like women and alcohol far too much.
Well, it sounds like you'd be a good candidate because most of our presidents seem to have the same likes. I mean, I think that's kind of a male thing, but yeah.
Well, maybe they're better. Maybe they're better hiding it than I am.
Yeah.
I have not lived by any means a perfect life, nor would I want my personal life to be held up, to a microscope. But I am interested in helping men and women whose views I agree with. I do a lot of pro bono work helping libertarian candidates or libertarian Republicans because I still have an emotional tie to the Republican Party. I was a young Republican national chairman from 1977 to 79. I had the privilege of working for both President Nixon and President Reagan. And neither of them were perfect either, but they're a darn sight better than what we have today.
Yeah, and I think that when you're young and you're joining a political party like that, I think in theory the political parties do have the right ideas and morals. I think that if I just came out and said, hey, this is what Republicans stand for, or I came out and said this is what Democrats stand for, I think in theory it sounds like, yeah, I could be for that. But I think what ends up happening is the people who end up saying that they're a Republican or Democrat don't support the actual ideas of their party. So I can see how growing up, because I mean, me growing up, I was more I lean more towards Democrats because of the fact that I just agree with the social issues. I agree with they seem to be more friendly with social issues. But it seems also like the fact that a lot of we have a family-owned construction company, and we're around a lot of blue-collar people, get their hands dirty. I'm one of them, and they're hardworking people, and they end up being more Republican sometimes because of the fact that they feel like they don't give, I guess, for a lack of a better term, like they feel like there's moochers out there and they're hard workers, and the Republicans protect them, and don't let the moochers mooch or whatnot. But I mean, so I can in theory, I think I understand how anybody can be a part of any party, because in theory they do have good ideas. But I think the problem is that we have a bunch of hypocrites in power who don't end up following any of the, you call somebody a conservative, call somebody a liberal, and then you look what a conservative is. They're not conservatives. They're not for less government and less spending. So it's just or not having government involved.
I think all our politicians talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. That's probably a good place to move this, because I have to move on to the next interview. But hey, Ricky, this has been great.
Hey, thanks, Roger. I can't thank you enough for being with us. It's awesome to have somebody who's had quite the resume and been around in politics so closely. So I just want to thank you so much for being with us. And anything coming up that you want to share with the listeners?
This September, my book, Nixon's Secrets, which explains Watergate and the pardon, will be out in September. If you're interested in it, you can go to Amazon.com and order it in advance right now. It's called Nixon Secrets by Roger Stone and Mike Calapietro. And of course, my Johnson book continues to sell very briskly. The paperback version of that will be out with 2 new chapters, which tighten the noose on LBJ and point the finger at him in the murder of JFK. That will also be out in September. The Man Who Killed Kennedy, the Case Against LBJ.
Yeah, awesome. And the weekend's here, so hopefully we both enjoy some alcohol and some girls this weekend. So enjoy the rest of your weekend. And like I said, thanks again, Roger. I really appreciate it, and talk to you soon.
I'll tell my wife you said that. Thanks.
Thanks, Roger. Bye.
Believe in the ripple effect.